When my sister and I left the orphanage, all we inherited was Uncle's farmland. But the scarecrow wasn't facing the field. That one wrong detail, that one silent sentinel looking the wrong way, would unravel everything we thought we knew about being abandoned. If you've ever felt like the world has forgotten you, stick around. This story is for you. And if you feel a connection to what we're doing here, telling the stories that often get left in the margins, consider subscribing. It means more than you know. The day I turned 18 felt less like a birthday and more like an eviction. 2 years I'd waited for it. 2 years of counting down the days since Maya had been placed with me at the St. Jude's Home for Children. 2 years of being her only real family after our Uncle Thomas had disappeared from our lives. The state called it abandonment. I called it a betrayal that had festered into a cold, hard knot in my chest. The release papers felt thin and flimsy in my hand, a stark contrast to the weight of responsibility that settled on my shoulders. I was a legal adult, which meant I was legally in charge of a 14-year-old girl with eyes that held too much of our shared history. Maya stood beside me at the curb, clutching the handle of her worn suitcase, a single box of her things at her feet. She was trying to be brave, her chin held high, but I could see the tremor in her hands. St. Jude's was all she'd really known for the last 2 years, a place of rigid schedules and bland food. But it was, at the very least, a constant. Now we were stepping into nothing. "What now, Leo?" she asked, her voice small, almost carried away by the morning breeze that rustled the sycamore trees lining the institution's long driveway. I looked at the slip of paper Mr. Abernathy, the home's director, had given me. It was an address for a law firm downtown and a bus schedule. "We have an appointment," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "About Uncle Thomas." Her expression softened at his name. Unlike me, she held on to a fragile, hopeful memory of him. She remembered the man who taught her how to skip stones and who smelled of sawdust and soil. I remembered the terse phone call, the strained voice telling us he just couldn't anymore. Then silence. The bus ride was a blur of muted colors and the low hum of the engine. We were ghosts in a world that hadn't noticed our absence. People got on, people got off, their lives a continuous thread we were no longer a part of. I watched our reflections in the grimy window, 2 pale faces against the moving backdrop of the city. We looked like what we were, unmoored. The law office of Davies and Finch was in one of those old brick buildings with a lobby that smelled of floor wax and old paper. A receptionist with impossibly perfect hair directed us to a conference room where a man who could only be Mr. Davies was waiting. He was older, with a kind but tired face, his suit jacket draped over the back of his chair. He shook our hands, his grip firm and dry. "Leo, Maya, I'm Gerald Davies. I was your uncle's attorney." The past tense hit me like a physical blow. I'd assumed, I'd hoped, that maybe this was about him coming back. "Was?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. Mr. Davies nodded slowly, his eyes full of a practiced sympathy. "I'm very sorry to have to tell you this. Thomas passed away 6 months ago. A heart condition." Maya let out a small gasp, and her hand found mine, squeezing it tight. I didn't feel anything. The cold knot in my chest just tightened. 6 months. He'd been gone for 6 months, and no one had even told us. We were wards of the state, a file in a cabinet. A dead uncle was just a piece of paperwork to be processed. He left a will, Mr. Davies continued, pushing a thick manila folder across the polished mahogany table. He left everything he had to the two of you. I stared at the folder. Everything he had. Which was what, exactly? The memory of a broken promise? His property, the lawyer clarified. A small farm out in Braxton County. About 40 acres, a house, a barn. It's all yours, free and clear of a mortgage. A farm. A whole farm. A flicker of something I hadn't felt in years, a tiny spark of hope ignited in my chest. A home. A place that was ours. Maybe he hadn't forgotten us after all. Maybe this was his way of making things right. Maya's eyes were wide, a silent question in them. I gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "But," Mr. Davies said, and the word hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Of course, there was a but. "There are complications. Thomas took out a significant loan against the property a little over 2 years ago. A private loan. It was a condition of that loan that it become due in full upon his death." He slid another document towards me. It was a ledger of some kind, filled with columns and figures. My eyes scanned the page until they landed on the final number at the bottom. The number was staggering. It was more money than I could even comprehend. "And there are 2 years of back taxes owed to the county," he added, his voice gentle. "The long and short of it is, the estate is deeply in debt. The land, the house, it's all underwater." The spark of hope died as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind a familiar, bitter ash. So this was the inheritance, a mountain of debt, a cruel joke from beyond the grave. "What are our options?" I asked, my voice flat. "Well," Mr. Davies sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Coincidentally, a developer, a company called Blackwood Development, has been making inquiries about the land for the last year. They're buying up properties in that area for a new resort project. They've made a standing offer." He named a figure. It was just enough to cover the loan and the back taxes, with a little left over. A few $1,000s, enough for a deposit on a cheap apartment and maybe a month or 2 of groceries. Enough to start over with absolutely nothing. "It's not a great offer," the lawyer admitted. "Frankly, it's predatory. They know the estate is in a bind. But it's an offer. It would wipe the slate clean. You'd walk away with a small nest egg and no debt." I looked at Maya. A single tear was tracing a path down her cheek. She wasn't looking at the papers. She was looking at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and heartbreak. She had allowed herself to hope, and I had let her. The weight on my shoulders felt heavier than ever. "We have to go there," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We have to see it, just once." I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her there was nothing to see but a pile of debt and a final, crushing disappointment. I wanted to sign the papers, take the money, and find us a tiny, anonymous apartment where we could try to forget we ever had an uncle named Thomas. But I couldn't. I couldn't take that last piece of him away from her without at least letting her say goodbye to it. "Okay," I said, my voice hoarse. "Okay, May. We'll go see it." Mr. Davies nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Approval? Pity? I couldn't tell. He gave us a cashier's check for a small amount, an advance from the estate's meager cash reserves to cover travel and supplies. He gave us the keys, a set of 3 old iron keys on a simple metal ring. "The bus to Braxton leaves at 3, he said. "It's a long ride." He was right. It was a very long ride. Each mile took us further from the gray familiarity of the city and deeper into a landscape of rolling hills and dense forests. We watched the world change through the window, from concrete and steel to wood and stone. The further we went, the more the silence between us grew, filled with unspoken questions and the heavy weight of our uncle's final, confusing legacy. What kind of man leaves his family a home that isn't a home? What kind of man saddles the two kids he supposedly cared about with a debt that would crush them? The cold knot in my chest pulsed with a dull, angry ache. I didn't know what we would find at the end of this road, but I was certain it wouldn't be peace. It would be a final confirmation of what I'd believed for 2 years, that we were, and always had been, completely on our own. The bus let us off at a crossroads with a single blinking yellow light. The driver pointed down a gravel road that disappeared into a thicket of overgrown trees. "Davy's farm is about 2 miles down that way," he said, his voice gravelly. "Can't miss it. Only place on this road for another 5 miles. He closed the doors with a pneumatic hiss, and the bus rumbled away, leaving us in a cloud of dust and an unnerving silence. The air here was different. It was thick with the smell of damp earth, pine needles, and something else, something wild and clean. It was the kind of air that filled your lungs and made you feel small. We started walking, our suitcases bumping against our legs. The gravel crunched under our feet, the only sound besides the chirping of unseen birds and the rustle of wind in the canopy above. It felt like we were walking into the past, into a place that time had forgotten. After what felt like an eternity, the trees opened up, and we saw it. The property was nestled in a small valley, a swatch of cleared land surrounded by a dark sea of forest. The fields were fallow, choked with weeds and wildflowers that swayed in the breeze. A 2-story farmhouse stood in the center, its white paint peeling, its windows like vacant eyes. A large graying barn sagged slightly to one side, its doors hanging ajar. It was a place of profound neglect, a portrait of surrender. And there, in the middle of the field closest to the house, was the scarecrow. It was a classic construction, a cross of weathered wood, dressed in a faded flannel shirt and a pair of tattered overalls. A burlap sack served as its head, with 2 black buttons for eyes and a stitched-on, down-turned mouth. But it wasn't looking out over the field, guarding the non-existent crops from crows. It was turned completely around, its button eyes fixed squarely on the front porch of the house. It was a small detail, a strange and unsettling one. Why would anyone build a scarecrow to watch their own home? "It's weird," Maya said, her voice a hushed whisper, as if she were afraid to disturb the quiet. "He's looking the wrong way." I just nodded, a strange chill creeping up my spine, despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. The keys Mr. Davies had given us felt heavy in my pocket. We walked up the overgrown path to the front porch, the wooden steps groaning in protest under our weight. The largest key fit the lock. With a rusty screech, the door swung inward, opening into a world of dust and shadows. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of decay and disuse. A fine layer of gray dust covered everything, the furniture shrouded in white sheets, the framed pictures on the walls, the floorboards that creaked with every step. It was like walking into a photograph. A life paused. There was a worn armchair by the fireplace, a stack of books on the side table next to it. In the kitchen, a single mug sat in the drying rack by the sink. It was all so normal, so mundane, yet it felt profoundly wrong. This wasn't the home of a man who had simply walked away. This was the home of a man who had expected to come back. We spent the rest of the day exploring the house in a kind of daze. We pulled the sheets off the furniture, revealing sturdy, simple pieces made of dark wood. We opened closets filled with clothes that still smelled faintly of our uncle. In what would have been our parents' old room, Maya found a small wooden box filled with her mother's costume jewelry. In a drawer in the study, I found old report cards of mine that he had kept, A's and B's in subjects I could barely remember. Every discovery was a fresh wave of confusion. These weren't the actions of a man who didn't care. These were the actions of a man who was holding on to memories, preserving a life. So why had he left us? Why had he burdened us with this impossible debt? As evening approached, the house grew colder. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows across the rooms, making the familiar shapes of furniture seem strange and menacing. We made a simple meal of the sandwiches and apples we'd brought with us, eating in silence at the dusty kitchen table. The silence was broken by the ringing of my phone, a cheap burner I'd bought with some of the money from Mr. Davies. The number was unfamiliar. I answered, and a brisk, professional voice greeted me. "Am I speaking with Leo Vance?" "Yes," I said. "This is Mark Colton from Blackwood Development. Our legal team informed us that you are the new executor of the Thomas Vance estate. I'm calling to follow up on our offer for the property." His voice was smooth, slick with a practiced charm that set my teeth on edge. "We're prepared to close quickly. We can have the money wired and the debt settled by the end of the week. It's a clean break for you and your sister, a chance to start fresh." "We're still considering it," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "There's no need to consider," he pressed, his tone hardening slightly. "It's the only sensible option. That property is a liability. The debt is accruing interest daily. The county will put a lien on it for the back taxes within a month. Our offer is the only thing standing between you and absolute ruin. I'll send the paperwork to your lawyer in the morning. I expect you'll make the smart choice." He hung up before I could reply. The call left a sour taste in my mouth. It was the pushiness, the assumption that we were desperate and stupid. He was probably right about the desperation, but something about his certainty felt wrong. It felt like he was trying to scare me into a decision. That night, neither of us could sleep. We laid out our sleeping bags on the floor of the living room, the unfamiliar creaks and groans of the old house echoing around us. Every gust of wind sounded like a footstep. Every shadow seemed to move. Maya was quiet, but I knew she was awake. I could hear the soft sound of her breathing, the occasional sniffle she tried to hide. Sometime after midnight, I got up. I couldn't stand being inside anymore. I needed air. I walked out onto the front porch, the cool night air a relief on my skin. The moon was nearly full, casting a pale, ethereal light over the entire valley. The fields shimmered, and the old barn looked like a sleeping giant. And in the middle of it all stood the scarecrow, its silhouette a dark, lonely figure against the silvered landscape. It was still watching the house. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was important. It was the one thing that made no sense, the one detail that felt intentional. Uncle Thomas had been a farmer. He was a practical man. He wouldn't have made a scarecrow for no reason, and he certainly wouldn't have pointed it the wrong way by accident. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. My heart started to beat a little faster. I walked off the porch and into the field, the damp grass soaking the cuffs of my jeans. The closer I got, the more unsettling the scarecrow seemed. Its button eyes seemed to follow me, its stitched mouth a grim line in the moonlight. I reached its post, a thick, weathered piece of cedar driven deep into the earth. I ran my hand over the rough wood, my mind racing. It's watching the house. Why? What was it looking at? From its vantage point, it had a clear view of the front door, the porch, the two front windows of the living room. It was looking at us, or rather, it was looking at where we were. I knelt down, my eyes tracing the line from the scarecrow's head to the house. It was just a house. Peeling paint, a sagging porch, dark windows. Then my gaze fell to the base of the post. The earth around it was slightly disturbed, not freshly dug, but different from the surrounding soil. It was looser, with fewer weeds.
It was almost imperceptible, something you would never notice unless you were looking for it. My breath caught in my throat. I started digging with my bare hands, clawing at the cool, damp soil. It was soft, easy to move. My fingers hit something hard and metallic a few inches down. My heart hammered against my ribs as I cleared the dirt away. It was a small metal box, like an old army ammunition can. It was heavy. I lifted it out of the hole and brushed the dirt off. It was sealed tight, but not locked. With trembling hands, I worked the latch. It sprang open with a rusty groan. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like old, dried leaves, was a small, oilskin-wrapped package. My hands were shaking so much I could barely untie the string. I peeled back the layers of waterproof cloth. There were two things inside. The first was a single, ornate iron key, heavy and old-fashioned. The second was a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it carefully. The note was written in our uncle's familiar, blocky handwriting. The ink was slightly faded, but the words were clear. "It's not watching the crows," it read. "It's watching the house. Forgive me. Trust the cold." I read the note over and over again, the words burning themselves into my memory. Forgive me. Trust the cold. What did it mean? The key was a mystery, but the last two words felt like an instruction. I stood up, the metal box in one hand, the key and note in the other, and looked back at the house. It looked exactly the same, a dark and silent shell under the moonlight. But now, it felt different. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a puzzle, and Uncle Thomas had just given us the first piece. I walked back inside, my mind a whirlwind of questions. Maya was sitting up in her sleeping bag, her eyes wide with fear. "Leo? What was that? I heard you digging." I showed her the box, the key, the note. I watched her face as she read the words, her expression shifting from confusion to a dawning, fragile hope. "Trust the cold," she whispered, looking around the dark living room. "What's the coldest place in an old house?" I thought for a moment, my mind racing through the rooms we had explored. The kitchen? The pantry? Then it hit me. In the back of the pantry, I had seen a heavy wooden door set into the floor, with a thick iron ring for a handle. A root cellar. The coldest place in the house. We found a lantern in the kitchen, an old kerosene one. It took me a few tries, but I managed to get it lit, its warm, flickering glow pushing back the oppressive darkness. We went to the pantry. The trapdoor was heavy, but together we managed to lift it, revealing a set of steep stone steps leading down into absolute blackness. The air that rose up to meet us was frigid and smelled of damp earth and stone. It was the kind of cold that felt ancient. "Trust the cold," Maya said again,
her voice barely a whisper. She was scared, but she didn't hesitate. She took the lantern from my hand and started down the steps. I followed close behind, the iron key clutched in my fist. The cellar was small, with stone walls and a hard-packed dirt floor. Shelves lined one wall, empty except for a few dusty, shattered jars. The air was still and freezing. We swept the lantern light across the room, looking for anything out of place. A lock, a box, a hidden door. But there was nothing, just stone and dirt. I felt a wave of disappointment wash over me. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe this was just another dead end. "Leo, look," Maya said, pointing the lantern at the far wall. "The stones." I looked closer. Most of the wall was made of large, rough-hewn field stones, fitted together with old mortar. But in one section, near the floor, the stones were different. They were smaller, smoother, and the mortar around them was a slightly different color, darker and newer. It was subtle, but it was there. I knelt down and ran my hand over the section. One of the stones felt loose. I pushed, and it shifted slightly. My heart leaped. I worked my fingers into the crack and pulled. The stone came free, revealing a dark, rectangular cavity behind it. I reached inside, my hand brushing against cold metal. I pulled it out. It was a lockbox, the kind you'd use for cash or important documents. And on the front of it was a keyhole that looked exactly right for the key I was holding. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying metallic click. I lifted the lid. Inside there were two things. The first was a thick stack of $100 bills, bound with a rubber band. It was more cash than I had ever seen in my life. I didn't count it, but there had to be thousands of dollars there. The second was a thick, sealed envelope with my name and Maya's written on the front in our uncle's hand. My hands trembled as I picked it up. This was it. This was the answer. We climbed back out of the cellar, the lockbox clutched to my chest. We sat on the floor of the living room, the lantern casting dancing shadows on the walls, and I carefully broke the seal on the envelope. Inside was a letter, several pages long, filled with that same blocky handwriting. I took a deep breath and began to read it aloud. "My dearest Leo and Maya," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found your way back here. I hope you found it in you to do that, despite everything. I know you must hate me, Leo. I know you think I abandoned you. I need you to understand that every single thing I have done for the past 2 years, every painful choice, was to protect you." The letter went on to explain. After our parents died, Uncle Thomas had taken us in without a second thought. But their death hadn't been a simple car accident, as we'd been told. They had stumbled onto something. Our father, a freelance journalist, had been investigating a series of illegal land grabs in the region, run by a ruthless local syndicate that worked in the shadows for big developers like Blackwood. They were using intimidation, threats, and fraudulent debt to force families off their ancestral land. Our parents got too close to the truth, and their accident was a warning to anyone else who might start asking questions. After they were gone, the syndicate came for our uncle. They knew our father had kept his research, his evidence, somewhere safe. They threatened him, and they threatened us. They wanted the farm, which had been in our family for generations, but more than that, they wanted whatever evidence our father had hidden. Uncle Thomas knew he couldn't protect us and fight them at the same time. So he made an impossible choice. He manufactured the story of his own financial collapse. The massive loan that Mr. Davies had told us about was a fiction, a paper trail he created with the help of Davies, who was a trusted old friend of our family, not just a lawyer. The debt was a shield. It made the property look worthless, unattractive, a legal mess not worth the trouble for the developers to acquire through legitimate means. It bought him time. And then he did the hardest thing of all. He took us to St. Jude's. He made himself the villain in our story. He cut himself off, making us believe he had abandoned us, because it was the only way to get us off the property and out of the line of fire. It was the only way to ensure the syndicate wouldn't use us as leverage against him. He knew we would be safe inside the system, anonymous and protected, while he stayed behind to fight. "I die a little every day, knowing what you must think of me," he wrote, and I could see a small, dark smudge on the page where a tear must have fallen. "But I would die 1,000 deaths to keep you safe. The money in this box is for you to start over. Take it, let the bank and the developers have the land, and disappear. Build a new life somewhere far away from here. Do not look back. This fight is not yours. Please, Leo, for me, for Maya, let it go." I finished reading, and the letter fell from my hands. The room was silent, save for the sound of Maya's quiet sobs. I wasn't crying. I was numb. The anger, the bitterness I had carried for 2 years had vanished, replaced by a hollow, aching grief that was so profound it felt like it would swallow me whole. He hadn't abandoned us. He had sacrificed everything for us. His home, his reputation, his relationship with us, and ultimately, his life. The heart condition Mr. Davies mentioned, I had a sickening feeling it was brought on by 2 years of constant, unrelenting stress. He had died fighting for us, and now he was asking me to run, to take the money and let his sacrifice be for nothing, to let the people who had murdered our parents, who had destroyed our family, win. I looked at the cash in the box. It was a ticket to an easy life, a clean break, just like the man from Blackwood had said. We could walk away from this whole mess, find a nice apartment in a city where no one knew our names, and pretend none of this ever happened. It was the sensible choice. It was the safe choice. And it felt like the most profound betrayal of all. I have to pause the story here for a second, because this was a moment that changed my life. And maybe you've had a moment like this too. A moment where you're presented with 2 paths. One is easy, and one is right. The world tells you to take the easy one, to protect yourself, to cut your losses. But in your gut, you know it's wrong. If you've ever faced a choice like that, I want you to know you're not alone. The hardest choices are the ones that define us. For everyone who has chosen the harder path, or is thinking about it, this community is for you. Let me know in the comments if this is hitting home. Your story matters. Okay, let's get back to that dusty farmhouse floor. I looked at Maya. Her tears had subsided, replaced by a look of fierce determination that I hadn't seen on her face since she was a little girl. "We can't," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "We can't just let them have it, Leo. Not after what he did. This is our home." And in that moment, I knew she was right. This wasn't just land anymore. It wasn't just a house and a pile of debt. It was a legacy. It was the final stand of a man who had given everything for us. To run would be to spit on his grave. To sell would be to hand a victory to the people who had taken everything from us. "No," I said, a new strength hardening my own voice. "No, we're not running." The decision settled over me, not with fear, but with a strange, clarifying peace. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what I had to do. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was smaller now, overshadowed by a burning sense of purpose. Uncle Thomas's letter was a warning, but it was also a map. He thought he had lost, that his only remaining move was to get us out. But he had left the breadcrumbs. He had left us the truth. He had also mentioned our father's research. If the syndicate was still after it 2 years later, that meant they had never found it, which meant it was probably still here, somewhere on this property.
"What do we do now?" Maya asked, wiping her eyes on the sleeve of her sweater. "We fight," I said. "He fought for us. Now we fight for him." We spent the rest of the night reading the letter again and again, dissecting every word, every phrase, looking for a clue he might have hidden, something that pointed to where our father's work might be. But there was nothing obvious. He was too smart for that. He wouldn't have risked putting it in writing. We had to think like he did. We had to think about what mattered to him. We looked through the house again, but this time with new eyes. We weren't just looking at objects. We were looking for hiding places. We tapped on walls, lifted floorboards, checked behind bookcases. We found nothing but dust and spiders. As dawn broke, casting a soft, gray light through the windows, we were exhausted and discouraged. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the letter spread out between us, when Maya picked up a framed photo from the mantelpiece. It was a picture of our mother, young and smiling, standing in a field of wildflowers. "I remember this," Maya said softly. "She loved the black-eyed Susans. Uncle Thomas always said she was as bright and stubborn as they were. He planted a whole patch of them for her by the old well." My head snapped up. The old well. It was at the far edge of the property, near the woods. It had been capped for as long as I could remember. It was just a circle of stones in the ground. But Uncle Thomas had loved my mother dearly. He had practically raised her, planting her favorite flower in a specific, out-of-the-way place. It felt significant. It felt like the kind of quiet tribute he would make. We took the lantern, even though the sun was rising, and a shovel from the barn. We walked out to the edge of the property, to the spot Maya remembered. And there it was, a small, overgrown patch of black-eyed Susans, their yellow petals like tiny suns in the morning light, growing in a perfect circle around a capped stone well. It had to be it. The well cap was a heavy slab of concrete, far too heavy for us to lift. But around its edge, the mortar was old and crumbling. I took the pointed end of the shovel and started chipping away at it. It was slow, back-breaking work. For hours, we took turns, chipping and prying, our muscles screaming in protest. Finally, with a loud crack, a chunk of the mortar broke free. We had a handhold. We both gripped the edge of the slab and pulled with everything we had. It didn't budge. We tried again, our feet slipping in the damp earth. It moved. Just an inch, but it moved. With a final, desperate heave, we slid the concrete slab aside, revealing the dark, circular opening of the well. A wave of cold, musty air washed over us. We shone the lantern down into the darkness. The well wasn't deep, maybe 20 feet. The walls were lined with stone, and it was dry at the bottom. And about halfway down, jutting out from the wall, was a small wooden platform. On that platform sat a large, heavy-duty, waterproof case, the kind a photographer or a scientist might use. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I found a length of old, thick rope in the barn. I tied it securely around the base of a nearby oak tree and lowered myself carefully into the well. My feet touched the platform, which creaked but held my weight.
The case was heavy. It took all my strength to maneuver it up and out of the well. We carried it back to the house and set it on the kitchen table. It was secured with 2 heavy-duty latches. I flicked them open and lifted the lid. Inside, perfectly preserved, was our father's legacy. There were files, notebooks, audio cassettes, and rolls of film. There were detailed records of land transfers, sworn affidavits from people who had been threatened, and photographs of the men who worked for Blackwood Development's shadow syndicate. Their faces clear as day. It was everything. It was the proof. Tucked into the lid of the case was one more envelope. This one just said, Leo. My hands were steady now as I opened it. It was another letter from my uncle, written on the same paper as the first. Leo, it began. If you found this, it means you didn't listen to me. I should have known. You have your mother's stubbornness and your father's heart. I am so proud of you, and I am so terrified for you. This is the whole story. Your father called it the Blackwood File. It's the evidence he was gathering against the syndicate that has been poisoning this county for years. When they killed him, I knew I had to hide it. I also knew they would never stop looking for it. The loan, the debt, all of it was a smokescreen to make me look like a desperate man on the verge of losing everything, to make the land seem like a simple foreclosure case. It was my only defense. I couldn't tell you the truth in the other letter, in case they ever found it. I had to believe you would be smart enough and brave enough to look past my warnings and find the real truth for yourselves. The scarecrow wasn't just watching the house. It was a marker for me. It pointed to the heart of the fight. It was my daily reminder of what I was protecting. The truth is, in this case, Leo, it is dangerous, but it is also your birthright. It is your chance to reclaim not just this land, but your family's name. The choice is yours. Whatever you do, know that I love you both more than words can say. I have been with you every day, even when you couldn't see me. Be brave, be smart, and be good to each other. Tears streamed down my face as I read the final words. Not tears of grief, but tears of release, of understanding. The full weight of his love, of his incredible, lonely sacrifice, washed over me. He hadn't just protected us, he had trusted us. He had trusted that we would be strong enough to finish what he and our father had started. We had our answer. We had our weapon. The first call I made was to Mr. Davies. I told him everything. I told him we had the evidence, the real story. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I knew it, he said softly. I knew Thomas had a plan. He made me swear I wouldn't tell you anything, that I would just present the facts and let you choose. He said you had to choose it for yourselves, or it wouldn't be a real victory. Bring it to my office, son. Bring it all. This ends now. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, police statements, and news reporters. The Blackwood File, as my father had called it, was a bombshell. It implicated not just a local crime ring, but corrupt county officials and executives at Blackwood Development. The story was front-page news. The fraudulent debt against our property was nullified. The back taxes were dismissed as part of the criminal conspiracy. The land, the house, the barn, it was all ours, free and clear. It was truly ours. We didn't sell, we stayed. We used the money our uncle had left us not to run, but to rebuild. We bought seeds and tools. We fixed the sagging porch and gave the house a fresh coat of paint. We hired a local contractor to help us mend the barn roof. The people in the nearby town, families who had also been squeezed by Blackwood, treated us like heroes. They brought us casseroles and offered to help us till the fields. We weren't outcasts anymore. We were part of a community. One afternoon, a few months after we'd moved in for good, Maya and I were out in the field. We had just finished planting the first rows of corn. We were tired, our hands were dirty, and we were happy. I looked over at the scarecrow. It was still there, in the same spot, but we had turned it around. It was facing the fields now, its button eyes watching over our new crops. Its job of watching the house was over. "He would be proud, you know," Maya said, following my gaze. "Dad, too." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. I know. I finally understood what an inheritance really was. It isn't about money or property. It's about the stories we carry, the sacrifices that were made for us, and the choices we make to honor them. Our uncle hadn't left us a burden. He had left us a legacy of courage, a home built not just of wood and nails, but of a fierce, protective love. And he left us a choice, to be victims of our past, or to be the architects of our future. We chose to build. We chose to grow. We chose to stay. The farm is thriving now. It's hard work, but it's good work. It's ours. Every morning when I walk out on the porch with a cup of coffee and look out over the fields, I feel him here. I feel my parents. This land isn't just dirt and weeds anymore. It's our history, and it's our future.
And it all started with a scarecrow that was looking the wrong way. A silent guardian pointing us toward a truth we never could have imagined. This whole experience taught me that the things that look like endings are often just beginnings in disguise. What looked like abandonment was actually protection. What looked like a crushing debt was actually a shield. And what looked like a forgotten piece of land was the most valuable home in the world. So, my question to you is this: what in your life looked like an ending, but turned out to be a new beginning? I'm going to read every single one of your comments, because these are the stories that give us all hope. Your story, your struggle, and your victory are what this channel is all about. If you want to be a part of this community, a place where we share the real stories of finding light in the darkest of places, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You are not alone in your fight. And sometimes, the most important thing you can do is just choose to stay, to fight, and to grow. Thank you for listening.